I said, Allison, I know something you don't. But I told her so she would know.
Right, right. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hey, Lynette.
You want to stand over here, Susan?
We're going, oh.
Were you in church?
No, I will be though.
The kids did a great job.
Oh, good.
But can will this work from over here?
It's actually right down here. It's not on.
Oh, it's not, okay.
Yeah.
3 services.
That is
Well, they may have different kids.
They've got different.
Yeah.
Same preachers in all 3
Oh, the same
services.
preachers,
Yeah.
okay. They did a
All
great
right.
job.
Now you should.
And brave. Get up in front of adults and.
Yeah, it's just hard to see.
Well, this
Yeah.
is
I'm
the-
looking- I tell you what, I'm
the
gonna-
3rd time.
Yeah.
Yeah. You saw it. the
All right.
first time.
Yes.
You're live streaming. You've
Yeah,
got the
like
camera. You got, yep, everything's going.
Okay, so we're on now. Okay.
All right, so I've got to go to my other classrooms. So,
Put your other hat on.
yes.
So I'm on, so if anybody tunes in, I'm
Yeah,
You
you're
can,
on.
on
you can
camera.
leave. You don't have to stay.
I don't have to stand up there, good.
Yeah, because we don't start for 12 minutes.
Okay. If I ask Lynette to read something, will they be able to hear her? Or is John have to tell us that?
Or maybe she should come up and read it so that she can be seen by the people.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know what the lights are here. They're in the congregation house. We needed a.
She asked. I haven't asked you ahead of time, Lynette, but,
Okay.
How many big words in it?
All right, thank you.
well,
Hey, John.
we can skip over
Do we
those.
need a mic
I
here?
think
That might be good.
So we, okay.
Yeah, just have to talk about
That's
it.
just the way it is.
I go to that slide about missionary journeys and get ready to talk.
There are no mics here,
Our
so,
missionary- Oh,
and that doesn't mean we don't need mics, but there aren't mics.
Right.
Paul's vision of the.
But if she goes up there and
Macedonia.
reads it, then people
So
will
So it's
see her and
16
hear
and
her.
6 through 10.
Yeah, okay.
Yes,
And I
they
thought
were
that would
wonderful.
kind
They
of
did a great
ground us
job.
on scripture.
Okay, that's good. I
And
thought you were absolutely fabulous. How long are you in town?
I love.
At the end of June.
And then,
Oh,
good
go back
morning.
to
How are
Jersey
you?
for a few months.
Just
For
for
a
a
long
few.
time until probably
I'm
Christmas,
glad, I'm
unless,
glad I kind of kept.
unless we come back for the opening of the church. I question whether it
Right, so
will be
is this?
on time.
Yes, I do too.
Yeah. If you've had any construction done, it's usually never on time.
Exactly.
Oh, you think it's gonna be?
Yeah, I'm wondering about that, but I'm gonna say, well, I should find.
The
I think
steps
it's
was,
Nicia.
I tried another way.
Then
I came out through the sanctuary and came, but there are 9 steps, but they're shallow steps. They're not full. So
Yeah, I went
that's
back
not
and
as
read
bad
all
as
the
what
scripture
we had last
I was
week.
telling you about my journey. And
Very good.
Well, I'll go
Let me
read it.
see. I'll find my way.
I think it's Kirby.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, 58.
Sure. They're so cute. I mean,
Um,
it's a good experience.
Oh,
It's
so
a-
they
it's
always
a-
come early if you don't mind walking up there.
I don't know whether I'd be so happy trying it, you know, when I was in high
Jack's
school.
good, he was around here, so once I run through the slide, then I thought I would ask each of you all to come up and just share a
Actually,
memory or
or
something
Well, they
that,
probably do it all.
Yeah.
I was just saying,
you didn't
I-
have that stuff.
I wouldn't
You know, if you meant.
be very comfortable doing that.
Questions.
But we all end up having to do some of
That's
that.
right, that's right.
It's still not easy.
Just sitting here with your eyes. Just fine. And kind of picturing all.
There was no way.
Yes.
On the other side.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, exactly.
And you had to get up and hear.
That just kind of makes it, like saying, we were very fortunate.
I know our granddaughter is a senior in college and she has to get up sometimes so late with her dissertation. And the committee travels.
Just been their thesis.
He's highly respected.
Yeah.
Got yourself kind of brought you. I don't know if you want to sit down this way.
Good morning, how are you?
I mean, they just think.
I did shower this morning, so.
You see things.
Oh, I see what you, I remember what you're saying.
We have to
We
treat them.
always do it. We got the times and we have to-
But it was
You have to catch the bus.
It's too obvious. It's just sitting here.
Well, but you gotta go, I'd like to tell you what.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I know. Yeah, I'm glad you reminded me.
Did you watch the
Well,
NC State game?
And would you have lunch when you get back? Or did they go like this?
At a table that is serving, at 11 o'clock. So we have to get back to time and put our orders in the envelopes and stuff.
So it's like having breakfast or brunch.
Yes, and you can have both. A lot of people just go right
Yeah.
for the night. And don't go back.
So I'm sure
I think they're open. No, they're not even open on Sundays.
So good for them, that's great.
Well, that sounds very nice.
And they have everything.
Oh, it's big.
Well,
Houston got big. They tore it down there. Oh, it's #1 seed. It's knocked down.
And are you in the main building?
oh, now I am. Uh-huh. And both of us are in the main building now. I didn't start there, but,
Okay.
as we get older, we have reasons to go to the main building.
Well, it's nice. I go to a circle meeting there, Marjorie Bowers.
Burris.
Has her training there.
Yes, there's several circles I say, because I teach one. Teach the Bible.
Yeah, I was gonna say 4, I know. So Martha Stevenson's not doing it anymore. She was at one point.
Everybody's there.
We did that missing her.
It was worth she said. Right, exactly. That's the morning, how are you?
I remember this, David Fleming, I think is his name. Booth. Oh, he's.
So.
You want that, Susan?
Don't you want us on the front row? It's a big ass, John, but it was a big ass, but they did it. No, you're allowed to sit. I'm gonna introduce you all, run through the slide deck, and then I'll see everybody. Y'all will come on out. So they can see us. And just share a few words about it. Special help. I think someone. That's right. I just was limited to, I didn't want to, I mean, I could have put some big slides in there, but
Sure.
but that would take the whole time, and I thought they'd rather hear from somebody other than me. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here.
You have the perfect outfit.
Yes. Well, this was supposed to be my Easter suit, but then I realized it was St. Patrick's Day, so I'm wearing it early. Glad everybody found us.
The directors.
There's so many wonderful things going on at this hour at the church, don't we?
I know, we are blessed. And I remember when we came 30 years ago, I can't believe it's been that long, they were renovating the first round of renovations to the main church, not the sanctuary, but the educational building. And Margaret Stauffer met us, and it was pouring down rain, and they had big umbrellas, and they walked us over to Chambers, because that's where the classes were meeting in Chambers that time. And so this brings back memories of all that. That was my introduction to DCPC. First Sunday we came, we said, not, yeah, the 1800s. 1993. So that's the year we came. And I think it was, I can't remember, it was 94 by then or the fall of 93. But I'll never forget that. Walked in, they said, "Oh, well, we're renovating. We'll have to take you, but I'll show you where to go." Because we were new to town. I didn't even know the campus well or anything. It's in the Chambers building. Do you know where that is? No. So Margaret gave us all umbrellas, and we walked over in the rain. So.
Well, I remember when, and it must have been before that, but maybe even when they had this conference, or had an expert come in and talk about thinking about the future of the growth of DCPC. At that point, we were at 400.
Oh, wow.
And we tried to think what the perfect number would be. You know?
Yeah. Well, did anybody guess 1,500?
No. I think nobody had any idea.
We've seen a lot of changes over that period of time, and y'all were here long before me. So, Pam, 1 minute, huh? I'm looking at the. It's nice to be in a lecture hall because there's always a clock right in front of you.
Oh, there we go. That clock is a little different than, okay, you're on. Thank you for being here this morning. Welcome, Susan Manning and fellow travelers. Would you raise your hand, fellow travelers who went to Greece and Turkey? Yeah. Who will be here to share their experiences. So Susan will lead us in a program, The Footsteps of Paul. So thank you, Susan.
Okay, happy to be with you all this morning. I want to first introduce my fellow travelers that were on the Greece trip. George and Susan Burhans, Trish and Brad Jones, and Glenette Popovich. They'll come up when I'm through with the slide deck, and I'll ask each of them to share a little bit of their favorite stories or memories about the trip. How many of us were there? Did we have 17, 18, something like that total, I think? So others that went with us from DCPC, we had Carrie Ann Melton and her daughter, Claire, went with us, and Allison Ray, and they weren't able to be with us this morning. And we also had Gary and Lib Simmons came up and went with us on the trip. So, but we went last fall, October the 11th through 22nd. Now I'm out of sync. There we go. Steps of Paul. Our itinerary, we landed in Athens, so we are not following the same order as Paul did, because of course Paul came from Jerusalem on his second missionary journey and came up through Turkey and then across to Macedonia. But we started in Athens, started and ended in Athens, and then the first day we went, after we got there, we went to Corinth, and then Thessaloniki and Berea and Philippi, Istanbul, Pergamon, Ephesus, Patmos, and Athens, back to Athens. And we're not going to talk about all these places, except some of my fellow travelers may mention special memories. But this morning we are going to talk about the footsteps of Paul and where Paul actually went. So Paul never got to go to Istanbul. As far as we know, he did not go to Pergamon, although that's close to Ephesus, and he would certainly have known of Pergamon. And Patmos is better known, or best known, not Paul, as far as we know, never went there, but John had his revelation on the Isle of Patmos when he was in prison. So they are in exile there, I should say. And he had been in Ephesus before that. So we saw lots of wonderful things, and we're pleased to be able to share those with you today. So we'll start with Paul's missionary journeys. There were 3 of them. And the first one was 47 to 49 CE. It was about 1,400 miles. The story of that journey is told in Acts, as are all 3 of the journeys. And Paul's companions for that journey were Barnabas and John Mark. And they went to Cyprus and the southern part of what is Turkey, but in those days was, I guess, Asia Minor. And then after that journey, he did 2 more journeys. The second and third one really were what our trip encompassed. And so our itinerary covers the sites on Paul's second and third journey. On Paul's second journey, he was accompanied by Silas. You may remember from the stories in Acts that John Mark left them and went home during the first missionary journey. And so when Paul and Barnabas were planning the second missionary journey, Barnabas wanted to take John Mark again, and Paul said, no way. He abandoned us, and I don't want him traveling with us again. And so that caused a rift between Paul and Barnabas. So Barnabas took John Mark and went back to Cyprus, and Paul had Silas as his companion on the second missionary journey. He was also joined on that journey along the way. He met Timothy on the second missionary journey, who became like a son to him. And he was also joined by Luke. And we know that because in Luke's story of Acts, all of a sudden Luke changes his pronouns and starts talking about we on the second missionary journey. So 49 to 51 CE, about 2,800 miles, covered not only Turkey, but this is where Paul first took the gospel to the continent of Europe. And I wanted to ask Lynette if she would come up and read the scripture that sort of sets the stage for Paul's second missionary journey. So Lynette, come here so that they can see you on camera.
This is Paul's vision of the man of Macedonia. They went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. When they had come opposite Mysia, they attempted to go into Bithynia.
Mm-hmm.
But the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. So passing by Mysia, they went down to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision. There stood a man of Macedonia, pleading with him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." And when he had seen the vision, we immediately tried to cross over to Macedonia, being convinced that God had called us to proclaim the good news to them.
Okay. And we heard all about Paul's journey over to Macedonia when we got to Philippi, but that was not our first stop. Our first stop for our group, and this is the second missionary journey, and apologize for the map, but you can see that Paul started down in Jerusalem, way down in Jerusalem, crossed over into what was referred to in the time as the Asia. And then he goes all the way up. I don't have a clicker, but all the way up to the northern part of Asia. You see Mysia there that's referred to in the in Luke's gospel, in Luke's Acts, and then right there on the coast is Troas, and this is where Paul had his vision, and then he goes over into Macedonia, which is Philippi, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail, and then down the coast of Greece to Thessalonica and Berea, and then finally to Athens and to Corinth before he comes back, crosses back over to Ephesus, and then all the way back to Jerusalem. So it was a long journey. But as I mentioned, we started in Athens because that's where the flights land when you go to Greece. And Paul only visited Athens one time, and it was on his second missionary journey. He never went back there, to our knowledge. And during that time, it was the center of learning and intellectual and debate. And Paul was received as sort of an oddity and someone that is curious trying to preach about this unknown God. But he links it to, he sees an altar when he's traveling around in Athens that was an altar to an unknown God. And he preaches to the thinkers of Athens from Mars Hill, the Areopagus, which is in view of the Acropolis, which we saw. And see, there it is. So in Athens, we were privileged to tour when we got back from our journeys in Paul's footsteps. We came back to Athens and actually toured the Acropolis and the Parthenon, but that's it during the daytime. And this is it at night. And our very first night we were in Athens, we went to we had a dinner on a rooftop restaurant, and that was our view. So that was a great way to start our trip. So from Athens, we went to Corinth, which is just south of Athens. And after Paul had gone to Athens on the second missionary journey, he went to Corinth, and he spent 18 to 24 months there, probably around 51 to 52 CE. And this is where he meets Aquila and Priscilla, who were Jews that had been exiled from Rome by the Emperor Claudius, and were told all the Jews were ordered to disperse and leave Rome. And they were tent makers like Paul, and they shared that that trade, and he met them for the first time in Corinth. And this is where he writes his first letter to the Thessalonians here in Corinth. He's already been to Thessalonica on the second missionary journey, and in his time at Corinth, he writes letters back to the churches there. Some of the highlights for us was we saw the Corinth Canal and the ancient Agora where Paul preached, and we also observed communion in Corinth. And I have to say it was one of the more unique communions because Linda, who was John's counterpart, and we were real sad because John ended up not being able to go with us, so we missed him. But Linda had arranged and had all the communion supplies, and we sat in the Agora there in Corinth, and we had our bread, and we couldn't have grape juice, but she had grapes, and I'll never forget that communion. It's the most unusual communion service, but we observed communion because we were in Corinth on the Sunday. So this is the Corinth Canal. It's a 5-mile man-made canal. It was first envisioned during the time of Nero in Rome in the 1st century as a way of connecting the two seas and to get things from Corinth across the isthmus there to Athens. But it wasn't actually built until the 19th century. It was opened in 1893. So during Paul's time, they literally would unload the cargo in Corinth and carry it across the isthmus on, I think someone told me one time it was on rollers, that they actually rolled the cargo, or maybe even rolled the ships across. Seems like I remember that. So that was the man-made area. Then we went up into the hills up above the canal into the ancient city of Corinth. And one of the first things we saw was this Temple of Apollo. And as I mentioned, Paul visited Corinth and spent a good bit of time here, particularly on his second missionary journey, but he also came back and visited Corinth again on his third missionary journey. And one of the interesting things about this temple is that the columns are hewed, they're solid. They're hewed from a solid piece of marble. So later on, the Romans built their columns in sections. So you see that and you see that in Athens as well, but in Rome, where the columns were actually cut in sections and stacked. But these were solid columns, and our guide made a big point of that. The other thing we saw, this is the Greek stoa or marketplace. The Romans called it the forum. And we learned that there's an arch in this picture, and we learned that the Romans built the arches. I remember that from one of our guides, that with the Greeks, you see the columns, and the Romans also used columns, but they incorporated the arches, and you see this beautiful arch. So this is where Paul preached when he was at Corinth, and also where he practiced his tent-making skills with Aquila and Priscilla. So after we went to Corinth, we came back to Athens, we boarded our ship, and we started our journey by ship, just as that is the way Paul would have traveled on his missionary journeys, as well as doing a lot of walking. I felt like we were walking about as much as Paul, but probably not. And our first port on the ship was Thessaloniki and Berea. And Paul visited both of these places on his second and third missionary journey. The first churches were founded on the continent of Europe here. And the oldest book in the New Testament, Paul's letter to the first letter to Thessalonians, was written to these churches. It was in Thessaloniki that a group of Jews got very upset with Paul and essentially had to leave very hurriedly. And he went to Berea, where he preached to the Jews there. And unlike in Thessaloniki, he was welcomed there by the Jews. And this is a beautiful mosaic area that the town of Berea has built to commemorate Paul's vision. And on the left-hand side is a mosaic of Paul's seeing the vision from the man of Macedonia when he was in Troas, asking them to come over and preach the gospel to them. And then on the other side, it is Paul preaching, a mosaic of Paul preaching to the Jews of Berea. And in the center, you have Paul himself, and supposedly those steps are the actual steps that Paul preached from. Don't know whether that is really the case, but that's what they told us. And here you have a statue of Paul, of the Apostle Paul, in that same kind of area in the center of Berea that we visited. So from Berea, we went on to Thessaloniki, back to Thessaloniki, and it had already been a busy day because we started there and then went to Berea. And so this is the scene of our small group that kind of broke away, and we had great lunch. This is one of the best food experiences we had. Street food, Greek street food, and we were on our own at this point, and we did a lot of walking that day. So we had education and fun. In Thessaloniki, we went to a monastery. I didn't have to put a slide in on that, where I guess that was the day that it was, that was a Sunday. That was the Sunday. We must have been in Corinth on Saturday. And because they were baptizing a baby that day in this monastery. And supposedly it's one of the places that Paul preached. And after that, we saw a fortress in Thessaloniki, a Roman fortress there. And nearby there is where we had our street food lunch. And then we hiked all the way from the top of the fortress down to the port. and it was a long walk. But this is one of the beautiful churches. It's named the Church of St. Paul. He preached in Thessaloniki. He founded a church there. And Thessaloniki is the second largest city in Greece, only behind Athens. So it's a big place. And this is looking down to the modern port from the Roman citadel, which is way up on the hill. And so you can kind of get a sense of how far that hike was for us that day. And I must say, we didn't really know where we were going. I remember the guide who was up on the fortress saying, "You see that white tower way down at the water?" And he said, "Just follow the white tower." But anyway, that was an adventure. So our next stop, the next day, was in the port city of Kavala. In Paul's time, it was called Neapolis. And this was Paul's first landing in Europe when he came over from Troas to Macedonia. Neapolis and Philippi were in the province of Macedonia. It was a very wealthy province, a very wealthy area because they did gold mining up in the hills in Philippi. And this was, as we say, Paul's first stop on the second missionary journey. Some of the highlights there was a very famous Roman road that connected not just Neapolis and Philippi, but also all the way to Thessaloniki and Via Ignatia, where Paul would have walked. And I do have a slide of that. Paul and Silas are imprisoned here in Philippi. And this is where they sang and were preaching in prison, and there was an earthquake, and the jailer's family was converted. And this is also where Paul meets Lydia by the river and baptizes her and her household. And it was the first baptism of record in Europe. So this is the Roman road. It's amazing that it's still in such good shape, and you can follow it down all the way from Philippi, which is up in the hills, all the way down to the port. Thankfully, we did not walk that road, but they stopped the bus and let us get off and take pictures. So, and then this is Philippi. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It was destroyed in an earthquake many years after Paul's time, but it was first a Greek city and then a Roman city. And this is the Greek theater there. That's one of our people taking a picture in the middle. But it dates to the 4th century BCE, so very, very ancient. And this is the prison cell where this was in the intercity, the marketplace forum area. There was also a jail in that area. And this is where they think a prison cell very similar to this is where Paul and Silas were imprisoned, where they sang and preached, and later in the night were freed by an earthquake. And the jailer and all the bars and everything came down, and the jailer was afraid that all the prisoners would escape, and he would have been held responsible for that. So he was going to kill himself. And Paul said, no, we're all here. He witnessed to the jailer and the jailer's family, and they all became believers. So this is a very famous part of the story. And it's very special to us to see this. And you can see how primitive the conditions were, obviously. And then also another part of the story of Philippi, this is where Paul meets Lydia. She was a wealthy woman, a dealer in purple cloth. She was from Thyatira, which is back in Asia, but she was in the Philippi area. And on the Sunday, Paul goes down to the river because a lot of believers gathered on the river. And this is where he met Lydia and baptized her and her family. And they had become the first baptized converts in Europe. And it's still used today, and it's beautiful because the river flows right through there, and you can see the sign of the cross. And There's places to sit, and there's a church right above there that we also visited, and they still do their baptisms down by the river. So it's a beautiful, peaceful spot. We move on then to Ephesus in Turkey. So we had several stops in Turkey. I hope somebody else will mention, we went from Philippi and the port of Kavala. We went to Istanbul. I'm not going to talk about it today, but others might want to mention Istanbul. We had a great trip there, but Paul did not go there. So I'm going to save that story for others to talk about. But Paul did go to Ephesus. Paul visits Ephesus on both his second and third missionary journey. And it was on his third journey that he stayed about 2 years there. And it was from his time in Ephesus that he writes the first letter to the Corinthians. And he has a tent making business here with Priscilla and Aquila. No. What am I doing wrong? Okay, John.
Hit the down arrow
Hit
on
the,
the computer.
well, this is my computer. Oh, over here.
Yeah.
There he is.
Look at that.
All right, maybe I better stand over here just in case my clicker's not working. So this is the Great Theater. Thank you for the technical assistance. The Great Theater at Ephesus is one of the wonders of the world. I mean, it's just amazing. It's so large. But Ephesus was a very special place on Paul's missionary journeys. The city was first a Greek city, famous Greek city, and then a Roman city. And it was amazing to me that at the time of Paul, there were almost 250,000 people that lived in Ephesus. Only 10% of the Ephesus sites have actually been excavated, and it's massive. And you can't think, I mean, it was just hard to grasp it. We were only seeing 10% of the city. And the theater itself sat 24,000 people. And Ephesus was the center of Artemis worship. And so Paul also got in trouble with, well, I think we're going to do it the hard way. I'll give you a couple of picture slides. This was as you come in the gate in Ephesus. This is a Roman bath, the ruins of a Roman bath. We found out from our guides it was very common that the bathhouses were built near the entrance gates because people would come in dusty and dirty, and the first thing they would want to do is have a nice bath. So this was a bath complex as we came into Ephesus. And this was the area of the Roman Forum, the marketplace. And this is where they believe that Priscilla and Aquila and Paul all had tent making shops there. And they were there for several years, and Paul was well known in the community, and it was a real special memory to, we had traversed all the way through the site of Ephesus, which is, as I said, is massive, and come to this forum, and our guide had us sit down, and he talked about Paul's experience, and it was very meaningful to hear that. And I think my last slide. This is in front of the Ephesus Library, the most famous probably building, and certainly in Ephesus, and one of the most famous buildings from antiquity. It's a 2-story library, and this is our entire group that our guide was able to get our picture. And so our trip did not end in Ephesus. As I mentioned, we also went to Pergamon, and we went to Patmos, and then back to Athens. But that will be the end of my slides today, because I really would like for you to hear from some of my fellow travelers about some of their favorite memories. And we wanted to give you time to ask questions as well. So
That's great.
Do we all come up?
yeah, y'all come on up, and then everybody can take a turn at the camera. And talk about your favorite memories. Trish and Brad, y'all want to go first?
Sure.
Go for it.
I mean, for me, it was just the history. And, we live here and we think our 200 plus years of history, and you're sitting over there and just walking on the same roads that Paul might have walked on, the same Mark Anthony and Cleopatra. I mean, we walked down that same road that goes to the port. So for me, that was just the history, the architecture. And like you said, Ephesus, we only are seeing 10% of it. And it's just amazing to think what else there is to find from that standpoint. And then, we talked about the group. I mean, we've, the connections we made. It was neat for me to, Claire was with us just to see how she's grown up, because we've known her since she was a little girl, and just how she's grown up and the woman she's become. It was great, just that bonding, like the walking we all did. I mean, we walked one day, it was like 30,000 steps.
I think that's when we hiked down to the port.
Yeah, exactly. So those are for me some of just the memories of just taking in the history, really, because we just don't have that here in America. So
Yeah, I agree. Some of the most fun times I had was when we kind of rebelled and decided to not take the bus down to the port, and we all walked, and then we had authentic food, and we got to see some of the places like the St. Paul Cathedral, and the food. Oh my gosh, the food was just amazing. So, but I think my favorite experience was the rug making experience that we had, and it was we got to see them make the rugs. We got to see the silkworms and how they pulled the silk off the silkworms, and we got to see them just making the rugs, and of course then we got to buy rugs. I remember people saying, "Will you guys buy a rug when you're over there?" And Brad and I are like, "No, like we're not rug people. We don't need one, but gosh, you appreciate it when they're there pulling the silk and weaving the rugs and designing them. I mean, it's just incredible." So that was kind of my favorite experience. And I didn't realize how unique it was till Susan told us later, like that's not something you get when you do a 1-day trip in that place. So now we have 2 beautiful rugs. I won't tell you what they cost.
Yeah, it was a cooperative too. It wasn't like a rug store in were we in Colorado?
I was trying to remember.
Where were we that day?
I don't know.
No, it was Ephesus.
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
it was Ephesus. And but it was a rug cooperative where people it was a family run operation, and they so anyway, we felt like we got to see it from the little cocoons of the silkworms were floating, and then they pull out all these silk strands, and they had the girls weaving there. It was amazing.
It was.
they fed us a meal.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
that
was a
meals,
great meal.
yeah.
I really like food.
Yeah, it was great. Burhans, what about?
So I'm going to talk about Istanbul, which was not part of Paul's path, but I don't know if you all know, but the 3 of us have a connection to Clemson. We all went to Clemson. Trish was my roommate there, and we all worked for housing when we were there. And we had a friend who is Turkish. He came from Turkey and was a student at Clemson. He was actually in Brad's fraternity. We kind of lost touch because when we graduated, he had to go back to Turkey to do his military time. Reconnected when Facebook became a thing, and kind of kept up with him a little bit, but really reconnected when we knew we were coming on this trip. And he said, "Great, I'm going to meet you there at the port, and I'm going to take you on a personal tour."
Oh.
So we ditched the tour that was scheduled with our group, and the 4 of us, this is my husband George, he has no connection to Clemson other than I.
We drug him in.
So he met us outside the port, and he took us to all the little local places that we would never see as a tour person. The first thing we did, we went to a local tea and sweet shop. He took us, it was like a cafeteria style. You walk up to and you're looking at, oh gosh, I don't know what this is. What are we going to get? And he's like, "Don't worry, I got it." So he ordered everything. We sat down. We had it was just wonderful treats. The tea was something you've got to experience if you ever go there. Then we went on our way. He took us to, I don't know how many mosques.
Yeah.
He took us to a local place to have lunch. You know, he took us to the Grand Bazaar. If you've ever been there, you need to have somebody that speaks the language because he would negotiate for us. Like Trish bought some scarves.
Yeah.
We were looking at rugs and he's like, no, keep looking. Okay. So anyway, just the day, I mean, I think we probably had 30,000 steps that day from all our travels with him. We ended up meeting his wife at the end of the day, had dinner with her. I mean, we were running from dinner to catch the ship as they were pulling up the red carpet. That was the kind of day we had. So that was my most favorite part of the trip.
If that obviously was the best part of the trip, I think for the four, at least for the four of us. I remember also where Lydia was baptized. There was a small church there. There was a group of Orthodox preachers, ministers, and they were doing prayers in there, which is a song. It's a very small place, probably not much bigger than this room. And the echo in it with them singing their prayers I thought was amazing.
It's amazing. It was.
That's one standout that they haven't mentioned yet.
Yeah. And I remember that church because it had beautiful mosaics on all the walls, and
Walls
you know
and the ceiling.
They had Paul and Lydia, and it was just amazing.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Glenette?
One of my favorite memories, Ephesus was a big day, but our guide took us first to way up on the hill in Ephesus to a first century house that the Catholic Church believes was where Mary lived. John brought Mary to Ephesus from Jerusalem when it became too dangerous to be in Jerusalem. And it's way up in the mountains, so peaceful, beautiful old olive trees that twist together. And it was just a very peaceful way to start the day because Ephesus is more crowded. But by doing that, by the time we got to Ephesus, most of the crowd had already moved through. So it worked out to be a really good way to do Ephesus.
Absolutely. And you felt that it has a special feeling at that place, I think, because it's very small, and you can kind of see how that might have been a peaceful hideaway for Mary to spend the last years of her life. And John was living in Ephesus at the time, and they said that he used to walk all the way from Ephesus up into the hills.
Took him 7 hours.
Yeah, like a whole day to just get there to see her. But that he took his commitment to Christ seriously, who asked him to look after his mother. And so when he moved out of Jerusalem and went to Ephesus to settle, she went as well. And the Isle of Patmos is just off the coast of Ephesus. And that's where he was exiled for a number of years. But then he came back to Ephesus, and we also saw the Cathedral of St. John there we packed a lot into that day. But anyway, anything else y'all wanted to mention that we hadn't already talked about?
I think just going back, because we saw a lot of ruins, as you can see. By the time we were done, we'd seen enough rock and stuff. But
What did Claire say?
yeah, ruined out.
Claire said, I'm ruined out.
But I think for me, going back to the details in the theaters, and you think about here, we have VIP seating, you got people sitting on the floor. They talked about back then, if you were that high rolling family, had the money, they carved your name in the seats. You can see where people's names have been carved in the seats, where they had a special place to sit in a theater. So something neat like that. And then also in the carvings, if you ever notice, they might start out big, but then they start getting smaller. They realize they're getting ready to run out of room, and they have to get smaller because you can't go back and white out.
Yeah.
So I think that was neat things we heard from our guide, right? So
Yeah, and we were really blessed to have wonderful guides everywhere we went. And as any of you all that have traveled know, the guides really make it or break it. And we were really fortunate that we had wonderful guides who made the history and the architecture come alive for us. And so that was really special.
Yeah, and our guide in Turkey, he was exceptional. And Susan said that, and I believe her because she's traveled a lot more than the rest of us. But we were talking to him about the ruins, and he said his father was digging in his garden and found a sarcophagus. And, he's like, what do you do? I mean, they do that. People do that all the time. They're digging in their backyard and it's just there. And he said they verified that it was just a normal, sarcophagus.
You cover it back up so nobody wants to come dig it up.
Right. He said,
Yeah.
you don't want to be kicked out of your house.
Turns
But-
into an archaeological site for the
Right.
next year.
And then he said, what would I do if I came to North Carolina? And we were all like, because it's just not to that level. But then we came up with some things. But it's just a whole different,
Biltmore.
go to Biltmore, the Wright brothers. And then, so anyway, just a whole different, amazing thing. Yeah.
Susan,
Yeah.
I've got a question.
Yes, I was going to say, we've got time, but we want to open it up for questions from you all.
Well, I've always heard about trips to the Holy Land, and we've not done that, but I'd be interested in knowing how it sort of affected your belief system, your faith, whatever. If anybody came away feeling, different.
Well, I think just seeing the sites, right? Because again, you're kind of going there. People are saying, like I said, this is the prison they might have been in. All right, do we really know that was the prison they're in? But you're kind of taking that. But seeing the house where Mary was, the cave where Revelations, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's neat to kind of see it, and I think that brings it just brings it more to life for me, right? Did it change anything? I don't know that it gave me a deeper, but just being able to see it and touch it, I think that was the neat part.
I was just gonna mention that, Dan Rhodes' son worked on that church in Corinth. And when we were going over there, he said, one thing you gotta remember is that in Davidson, we found a nice location to build a nice church and everybody can get there. But in Greece, these churches are built where God has already spoken to somebody. And you get there and you realize, dang, this is a holy place.
That's true.
Just the locations that these churches have been built are extraordinary.
Yeah, exactly.
It's there for a reason. It's not convenient, but it's a holy place.
It is a holy place, absolutely.
Well, I think for me to be able to stand and look at the hillside, because there are often hills around, that hasn't changed much since Paul's time. So I could kind of imagine him being there and just thinking about the Roman roads and him traversing the distances he did. Whether one of our guides said, well, he probably rode part of the way, but on that road, it would have been a rocky trip, whether you walked or whether you were in some kind of conveyance. So I think an appreciation for the amount of distance Paul covered and the determination that he had to do it, I think for me.
And we heard the stories and read the stories from Acts about Paul and how many times he got thrown out of places, or run out of places, or he had to escape. And, when you're there and you see the site and you imagine what it must have been like. I mean, in Ephesus, in that big theater, is where there was so much controversy about the goddess Artemis. And Paul had been preaching against idols. And of course, the merchants made their living selling these little silver idols of Artemis. And, they were about to lynch Paul and his group because, they were interfering with their commerce because, he was saying those idols don't mean anything, they're just metal. And, it somehow it just brought that to light. And then when you think about how many places and how determined Paul was to carry the word, even in great difficulty and with great persecution, and that the church survived and thrived, throughout that spread of the gospel. And it's kind of amazing that we're all still talking about it all these years later. And thank goodness for those early missionaries who brought the word.
Did you guys fly over or did you sail over? How did you get there?
We flew into Athens, and so round trip, we flew into Athens, and we had a part of a day in Athens where we kind of got our bearings, and then we had a day trip to Corinth, so we went from Athens to Corinth on a bus, and then we went back to Athens, and we left from the port of Piraeus, which is outside of Athens, and we did the trip up the coastline to Thessaloniki and Philippi, and then on up to Istanbul, and then back down the coast of Turkey to Pergamon, which we haven't talked about, but was a major center of learning. They were also famous for their library that we saw there, and then to Ephesus, and then to Patmos, and then back to Athens, where we had a couple of days to do all the touristy things in Athens, see the Parthenon and everything, and see Mars Hill, climb up to Mars Hill where Paul preached, and then we flew home. So it was a long trip. Yeah.
So are you saying that you were mostly on the ship and traveling, except
Yes, except when we were in Athens.
when you were on land?
Except when we were on land.
You took
Yeah.
a bus,
Yes.
but mostly you were on a ship.
Yes.
And I guess Paul was too.
Would have been too. Yes. Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, he did a lot of walking in between, just as we did, but mainly the major stops he was on a ship.
Right, but from city to city, Paul would have walked.
Yes. Unless he
Had
was,
some kind of.
or sailing down the coastline, you know.
But he would have sailed.
And there was probably some of both. But yeah, and we found, I mean, I later have found out, talked to some people since we've been friends and other folks, since I've gotten back, that this is a whole big new tourist thing about following in the footsteps of Paul. I had no idea. I thought we were just doing it, been designed just for us, but apparently these cruise lines have, you know.
I think
tapped
everybody on the
into
cruise
this.
was doing it,
Oh, really?
or at least, yeah, there was a good, the Orthodox monks were on
Right,
that cruise.
yeah.
We saw, I saw several different, I think they just kind of go different directions.
Right.
But I think the vast majority of that cruise ship was.
We're doing that. Yeah,
Yeah, the
exactly.
first time I ever heard about one of these trips was a friend of mine went, and it was 30 years ago.
Yeah,
She went.
so they've been doing it a long time.
Yeah. And ever since then, I wanted to go. I wanted to go.
Well, you should have gone.
I know
with
you
us,
should
Lavinia.
Maybe someday.
Pam?
I've never been there, so it's fascinating to see these slides. So as you think about the journey when you're home and you imagine being there and you have expectations, what was different when you got there? Was there anything that you didn't expect? Was there anything that you expected that you didn't find? What was different when you look at that whole experience? Aside from the rugs.
I know.
I think for me, I wasn't, we knew we were going to Istanbul, so I didn't know how Istanbul was going to be because, you know, Muslim country. I mean, I've been to India, I've been to Singapore, I've been to UK, so I've been to different places, and you always wonder, how are you going to be welcomed? And I felt safest there, I think, than any place else because just everybody was nice. I mean, it was great we had Sinan with us. I mean, you have a local, that helps, but I think I never felt threatened even in the bazaar. I mean, there's just people everywhere. I mean, it's just amazing. You know, you walk downtown Charlotte, it's nothing compared to walking through Istanbul and just the number of people and everything. So I think that was, you know, I wasn't sure what to expect going into Istanbul, but that was completely opposite of what I kind of thought I might be going into.
Yeah. That in the bazaar, it's very crowded in. So the banks, to get money in and out, just have carts. Looks like the old Good Humor ice cream carts. There's no guards, no nothing. Just they push the cart.
It's full of money.
Full of money.
Like hundreds of thousands of dollars on this cart, and there's just a couple
And
of
then
guys.
just guys, just one guy pushing around, changing money out.
Yeah. Because that is a central area of currency exchange right there
Yeah.
too. So, yeah.
I think for me, I knew that Paul was a Roman citizen, but being there and seeing Roman things, it kind of connected me more to Paul being a Roman citizen and what it was like to experience being a believer at that time. So I appreciated that. And it's, you know, there are so many sites and so much at each site. You're sitting on things that in this country they wouldn't let you
That's right.
close to.
Yeah.
So you kind of get a vibration of antiquity.
And to learn that, you know, Corinth and Ephesus both, you know, they started out as Greek cities. And I mean, so they're even more ancient, you know, and it's just hard for us to wrap our minds around how old things are and how well preserved things are. I mean, and the fact that they've been able to excavate so much. It was just phenomenal to be able to see it, you know, with your own eyes. And then to think about Paul's journey in the context of these places that would have been also familiar to him. So I think it does. It doesn't just make history come alive; it makes your faith come alive, you know, and in a special way.
At these theaters, what was it? All cultural type things that took place.
Not for the Romans.
Not for the Romans.
Not for the Romans.
That's what I
A lot of blood
was
was
thinking.
shed.
They were Roman at some point, but there might have been other types of things.
Well, in the Greek times, they were really dramas and plays, and you know, and it was more cultural. But the Romans kind of took the
extremes.
You know, they're the ones that introduced the gladiators and the
Right.
you know the blood sports, if you will. But they were using the same Greek theaters for that, and in some cases they added on.
Did they talk about, the tour guides talk about any of the times that the Romans were there and what was different?
Yes, they did. And that they talked about, you know, that in the Greek theaters were usually in the half round, the moon, you know, the half moon crescent shape, and you know, and the stages were down at the bottom, so the acoustics were really good. But then the Romans made it in the round, the Colosseum, you know, all the way around. They talked about the differences there, you know, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting, and Brad's already mentioned this, how, you know, even in our day, we have the box seats and the, you know, and well, they have the same thing there, you know, where the wealthy elite or where the emperor had his or her box, you know, so they could get the best view of whatever.
And they could carve their name.
Yeah, and carve their names in their seats so they didn't have to fight for a seat. But the other thing that I remember them talking about is how quickly they could get everybody out, because, you know, and it's the design that we still use today in our big, you know, arenas and that kind of thing, is all these multiple ways that they can go out and multiple staircases. And it was just
Some of those amphitheaters are still used today for concerts.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially in Athens, where they, you know, around on the Acropolis, they have the Odeon Theater, and there was, I think, one time there were good.
Well, we were having
they were
that
at
dinner
a
and
restaurant.
having a concert.
Yeah, we were in a
That
restaurant,
night.
and there was going to be a concert that night, and so it's wonderful that they still are using these places, you know, and it's really.
What goes on at the park? Did
Um,
they mention?
Well, they're constantly renovating, and of course, we heard all the controversy about the Elgin marbles, and we had a great guide the day we were at the Parthenon, and it was really crowded. And apparently it goes all the time, but we had a guide that kind of led us through and told us the history, and you have beautiful views over Athens because that's the highest point, and you can all over Athens you can see that, you know, you could see our site, and it's lit at night, so it's just beautiful. But then there's down on the slopes, there's like two different theater and performance venues that are carved out of the rock of the Acropolis, and that's where they still have a lot of performances and things. So.
A lot of musicians have been there. They
Mhm.
were telling us Yanni had been there, and other people I can't remember.
Right.
There's a replica of it in Nashville, Tennessee.
Yes, there
You've
is.
never seen
Yes.
that.
And I had
And it's on a
been,
hill.
and I had been there in September and saw it which was interesting because they have the replica of the Athena statue, which of course has long been gone, but it's, you know, and in its time, it was made out of pure gold. And so it was interesting. In fact, I showed some of my pictures from Nashville to the group because, I mean, it's
This is what we're gonna
perfectly
see.
pristine, you know, and then you go and see the real thing.
Yeah.
But the other thing was really interesting, and Breeze has done a good job with this. One of the things they've been in controversy with the British Museum for years to try to get the Elgin marbles that were taken off the Parthenon back. And the excuse was, well, you don't have any place to preserve them or keep them. Well, they built this beautiful Acropolis Museum now, and we had a chance to tour that. And they have the whole replica of the Parthenon. I think it's on the 3rd floor that you can see, where they've taken, you know, some of the surviving marbles that you can see, and then they've left places,
Okay.
and for the ones that are not, that are in the British Museum. And so there's been something just since we've been back about more controversy about that, but it was interesting because then they've taken a lot of the things that the original statues and things that were getting damaged on the Acropolis, and they brought them down into this museum. They have replicas up on the Acropolis, but so that was
Were
interesting.
you all able to actually go into the Parthenon and into up the Acropolis all the way up and climb the stairs?
Oh,
and
yeah. Oh, yeah.
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 Where the columns were?
Yeah, absolutely.
Doc killed us all for that day.
Yeah, that was another big day of walking, but yes.
I mean, that had to be so mind-boggling.
Oh, it's just,
to be there.
it's
when you
just
think of its
amazing.
history.
Yes, and you can, I mean, the Parthenon itself is under renovation, so it's kind of, there's scaffolding, and you can't actually go inside of it, but you can go everywhere up on the top once you get up there, which is quite a hike. But
Yeah, they said you needed to be good at walking for this trip, but I think that was an understatement. They just don't allow for, hurt knees or
right,
in most instances.
and certainly no handicap accessible anything.
Right.
Bill?
2 quick things. Somewhere on television in the last few months, I saw a feature talking about a Greek project to make 3D printed with plaster copies of the British Museum holdings, so they can give them to the British Museum when they decide to return the real ones to Greece. So the Greeks are preparing
Yeah.
this.
And they actually have the
Right.
replicas of the
Right.
plaster inside this new
Yeah.
Acropolis Museum, and that's what they said, well, we'll give you those.
Right,
Give
well,
them back.
they're working.
Back
to
the
complete
original.
Everything.
Yeah.
The other thing is, Susan mentioned it a few minutes ago, Robin Rhodes grew up here. He went to Chapel Hill, majored in archaeology, and for most of his career, he taught ancient Greek and archaeology at Notre Dame. He's retired, still lives in South Bend,
Oh, well.
but he spends pretty much mid-May through mid-July in Corinth. His title is Principal Investigator of Ancient Greek Stone Monuments at Corinth for the American School of Athens, or something like that. I think I got it close. He loves to have visitors from Davidson. And he was one of my brother's high school friends, so I knew him pretty well. And I spent a week with him living in down the hill from the ruin in ancient Corinth about 20 years ago. But if you're ever going in that early to midsummer, let me or somebody else, some old person here who knows Rob, and help you get in touch with him, because he is the best guide. The first day I was there, he said, let's go around. So we wandered, and he introduced me to everybody. And at the gate, he said, let him in for free for the next week. So I had free
Nice.
entree to the pottery shop and everything else in the ancient ruin, and access to other things with him. And in the evening, sat in the taverna drinking a beer and talking with some local or some other archaeologist. It was absolutely an extraordinary experience. But he's anybody from Davidson he's open to. So
Wow.
So take advantage of that if you're going to be there in the mid to early summer.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we were there in October,
Yeah.
which was a great time to be there because it wasn't so hot. But yeah, that would be wonderful to have someone like that who has the expertise and some of it, because they are ruins, you have to have somebody that has the vision that can kind of paint what it would have looked like. And that's why the guides are so important, because they can help you piece it all together. This is what you're really seeing, not just a bunch of rocks.
Right. Your picture of the Temple of Apollo in Corinth is nature project.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just remember that was the very first thing we saw. We were all trying to get our pictures,
Right.
and our guide was trying to tell us about it. And, it's a fascinating sight. And then to see that marketplace where, he would have met Priscilla and Aquila there. I mean, that was just kind of brought it all home as to how significant this place really was. And,
I have a question.
yes.
What do you do with your rugs? Do you walk on them or are they hung up?
Well, I think all of us here bought at least one rug. We have one at the front door, and then we have one in our office, and
I'll
Take off
roll
your
around.
shoes?
Yeah,
You have
no.
to take off your shoes.
no, they said that you're supposed to.
Yeah, they say they're very durable.
Yeah,
And
one.
the interesting thing we learned about Turkish rugs is they're triple knotted, unlike some others that are just double knotted. And so they said they're very durable. They do have, they showed us rugs. They're really meant for hanging. They're not meant for, they're very much more delicate. But everything I think we bought were all rugs that go on the floor.
Are they wool?
Some of them were cotton, some of them were silk, and some of them were wool.
Yeah, we have a silk and a wool.
And how did you get them? Did you have to ship
Oh,
them?
they ship.
They
Say
ship
it
them.
all.
Oh, they make it so easy. They have it down to a science.
Take your credit card. That's all you do.
Yeah, that's right. But the interesting thing that they did was they encouraged you to take pictures of your rugs, which we did. I guess I should put a slide up on the rug, but also on the backing where it has the label, they tell you they bring you a Sharpie out and you initial your rug, so that you know that you are getting the rug that you saw. And
And they butter you up. So we had this wonderful lunch, and then we saw how they make
and
the
lots of
rugs.
wine.
And then they say, "What would you like to drink?" So there's wine, and is it Rocky? The
Turkish drink.
was it Rocky?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
licorice.
Like
liqueur.
yeah, like a shot of something. And so we're all drinking, and they're showing us rugs, and then they
It's a
say,
huge room. You're sitting on the outskirts on benches, and they start rolling out all the carpets, different sizes, different colors. They probably showed us 25 rugs.
Yeah.
Just,
Oh, easy.
and then they take you back to the other rooms. Oh, what would you like? What are you interested in?
And get ready, because you'll get a telephone call if you haven't already, saying, one of our people is in the area, and they'll be glad to talk to you.
well, and when they deliver it, we bought
They
our
have
second
extra
rug
rugs with
when they delivered it.
Oh.
So yeah.
We could go on and
I
on
know.
because we obviously
Thank
had a
you.
fabulous trip, but thanks for your.
You have been
Yes,
our
thank
guide.
you.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I said it was great to be able to do this because then it brings back all these wonderful memories.
I know, I was watching your faces over there, and it's like, oh, yeah. Thank you so much.
We had a good group of people, as y'all can see.
We did.
And next
Good to
week,
see you.
Rob Spock, the retired chaplain from Davidson College, is going to be here. He's going to tell us the stories that his dad shared with him about his remarkable experiences during World War II and how those experiences shaped Rob's call, his understanding and faith in God, and determined his path in life. So I think it's going to be a fascinating Sunday. So see you next Sunday. And you're all welcome to come.
Thank you.
John might be in shock.
Yeah.
Susan, you did a wonderful job.
That was
Really,
great.
I don't see that.
Are you going to take that on the road?
No. I did it just for y'all. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to. And in between, when I
did this trip, and I was doing the presentation, I lost my, I mean, my laptop broke, that's the point that I had to take up the transfer of my documents, You're most welcome. We enjoyed it so much, and we wanted, we're happy to share it with you. Is that your trailer? With all of his notes. And it's my favorite because, of course, it's all of his notes. And I'm along with his little sarcastic comments about.
That's what I was standing thinking, I wasn't gonna say.
Yeah. Been studying Genesis. I know it's a hard problem. It's a study Bible. But he used to teach in humanity.
Nice try.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, you're welcome. Good, I'm glad you enjoyed it. We sure had a great time.
I wish I could.